son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise.
All right, good to see all of you. When Jim said end of summer, there was two emotions, a little sadness in your heart and a little gladness in your heart. You know who you are, and you know why you had whatever emotion you had. Hey, I will say this too. I had the privilege of, Angie and I drove down to camp, and I got to do one of the sessions and bore the kids for a little while. And so it was amazing to see. I also just want to reiterate what Jim said and just say thank you. Thanks for praying. Thanks for being a church that supports financially what happens. But I want to say Jim didn't just survive it. He is a fantastic leader. And those students and those leaders, and if you're a parent, we're lucky to have him. He led very well. And there's an incredible group of people that gave up vacation time. There were interns that work unpaid, those kind of interns, to make a great experience for our kids at camp. So when you see them, thank them, especially if you're a parent, but even if you're not, if you're a grandparent, whatever your story is, thank them for that. All right, so let's jump in today. We're going to have some fun. Well, I'm going to have fun. You guys might as well come along with me and laugh a little bit in church today, too. Today, for once, we won't just be laughing at me. Usually it's my stories. I'm going to tell you one that I think you'll enjoy. But we're in this series, as you heard, called Solomon Says. We're talking through the book of Proverbs, wisdom. And so I've said this every week. I want to bring you up to speed. It's a review for some of you if you're here new or tuning in for the first time in a while. Maybe you haven't heard this, but there's two big ideas that in the the first few verses of the book of Proverbs that Solomon just says, hey, I don't want you to wonder what Proverbs is about. I'm just going to tell you. And so the two big ideas are the idea of attaining wisdom and the idea of the fear of the Lord. Attaining wisdom and the fear of the Lord. So this idea of attaining wisdom, we've said every week, comes from the Hebrew word there is the idea of applied skill or applied knowledge. So what he's saying out of the gate is that Proverbs isn't about learning stuff. Like, we want you to learn stuff, but it's not about learning stuff. It's about learning stuff so that you can do stuff. It's about putting it into practice so that it'll lead to a different kind of life. So that's the very first thing. This idea of attaining wisdom is not just to learn something, but it's about doing something. The second idea is the fear of the Lord, which we talked about. The fear of the Lord is this idea of reverence or awe, that when we look to God, there's something in us that can recognize that there's God and there's me. And there's a God and I'm not that God. And if that's the case, then God becomes the definition setter in all things in life. And my role now becomes that I discover the definitions that he has set. And you find that all throughout the book of Proverbs, that one of the keys to wisdom is this recognition that, hey, God's ways are higher than my ways. God's eyes see things that my eyes don't see, and God is God and I am not. So those two ideas are really the underpinning ideas that run all throughout the book of Proverbs. And this other thing that I've said every week that I want to say again today is that Proverbs are not promises, they are principles. I've had some of you that grew up in church approach me and say, hey, I've actually never heard that said that way. Now, there are all kinds of promises. I want to be clear about this. There are promises that God makes to us. And sometimes Proverbs match those promises, but they are not by nature or in nature promises. They are principles. It's, hey, if you do this 9 times out of 10, this is what's going to happen. This is the way of life. So with that, you're up to speed. We're going to jump in today. We're going to look at 2 different Proverbs. But for everyone over the age of 16, and maybe even if you're like 14 years old, but over the age of 16, if you look back, as you look back on your life, some of you look back 2 weeks, some of you it's going to be 2 days or 2 hours, some of you it's going to be 2 decades. But as you look back on your life, how many things, you don't have to come up with an actual number, but I want you to think about how many things that you did were all about gaining someone's approval. Like pretty much all of them, right? Like when you look back on your life, you look back on the decisions you make, the ones you did, and the friends you had, the ones you did, and the things, all the stuff Like some of you are like, I don't want to go back to 16 to think about this. How many of the things that we did were about gaining someone's approval? See, I think there's something in the human soul that craves the sound that's in this box. Some of you are like, ooh, visual illustrations, I love it. All right, here's the sound. You ready? You know what it is? It's that. Don't you just love this? Just approved. Approved. We love the sound. And again, whether it's the actual literal sound, there's something in our soul that craves this. We just want approval. And this thing is driving us in ways that sometimes we don't even understand. So I think it's interesting if you think back. I wonder how many bad ideas find their origin in this, our need for approval. I wonder how many bad outfits find their origin in this, our need for approval. I wonder how many bad decisions. I wonder how many bad haircuts find their origin in our need for approval. So I could not say all of this and not share with you this story. I called my buddy Shane. This was the first thing I thought about. I said, Shane, can I share this story? And he said, yeah. He said, you can share it. He said, only if I can watch it later. And I said, yeah, man, you can watch it later. So my friend Shane, this goes back. Some of you will understand this, and I'll bring you up to speed if this predates you. But it was back when this phrase, rico suave or rico suave, was popular. There was a song that had made it popular. Some of you have no idea what that means, so Google is going to help. This is what it says. Rico Suave tends to be used as the name of a stereotypical Latino ladies' man who is very charming but cocky, often depicted as wearing gold jewelry with flowing or greased hair and long unbuttoned shirts over a muscular torso. Now, there is an image that came to your mind, and I assure you that image is not my friend Shane. He's very Caucasian, which makes this story so much funnier to me. But so what was happening was he was on the offensive line of the football team, and all of them in solidarity for their big rivalry game, they were getting their head shaved. And so his mom was a hairstylist, so he decided to go strong. He decided that he was going to have her shave suave in the back of his head. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? I mean, there's no chance this could go sideways, right? So he does it. Shows up to school the next day. He said he didn't make it more than 3 or 4 steps into the building, and one of his buddies yelled, "What up, Swavey?" And he said he thought for a second. He's like, "No, dude, it's Suave, like Rico Suave." He's like, "No, dude, you're Swavey." So he was supposed to put that, but instead his mom shaved that. He said she didn't know it was French. He said, so from that moment in his life, throughout the rest of his high school career, he was known as Swavey. I still call him Swavey to this day. I didn't even know him in high school. So he's a Charlotte OG, like he lives around here. And he told me recently, he said, Chris, I still bump into people in town that call me Swavey, right? So Shane, thank you. For once, I didn't have to be the focal point of the sermon illustration, so I'd like to thank you. But let me just say this. Let me tell you what's true, and it's true of you, and I know it's true of you, and here's how I know it's true of you, because you have a pulse. Here's what's true of you. Everybody cares about somebody's approval. You just do. There's something in our soul that craves approval. It's no matter who you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's been going on our entire lives. From the time you could walk and talk, you were craving someone's approval, to the time later when we can no longer walk and talk, we will still be craving someone's approval. And every moment in between, there's something in us that desires it. And I wonder if you remember the first time you realized there was a them. There was a group of people, or there was a person that you desired their approval. And do you remember the time that you realized that you weren't a part of the them? Like, you weren't in the group. You didn't get invited to go out after work for drinks. And you're like, oh, that was the moment you realized. And you felt something. Because you didn't even know you wanted their approval until you didn't have it. For some of us, it goes way, way, way further back. Maybe it's something with your parents. Maybe it's something else. But do you remember there's moments, and it doesn't just happen as a kid. It happens right into our adult life. There are these moments where we just realize there's a them out there. We desire to be liked by them. Their opinion matters to us, but we didn't know their opinion mattered to us until we weren't involved. until we were outside the circle. And here's the thing. It would be great if we outgrew this, right? It'd be great if when you were 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, or when you were in middle school, one day the switch just flipped and you just left it all behind. But that's not how it happens. It gets dragged into our adult lives, and you know what happens? It just becomes more sophisticated. Like, our need for approval just hides in different ways. Like, let me ask you this. Have you ever been to the gym? And then there's that one guy that just, if he feels like he lives there. Like, his whole motto in life is, I like to pick things up and put them down. You know what I'm talking about. Meanwhile, there's me over on the treadmill just trying to finish 1 mile in one Star Wars episode, right? You know what I'm talking about, ladies. There's the person. You know who she is, that she wakes up at 9 in the morning, ready to go out at night. She looks perfect. Everything is put together. You don't know how. You've never seen her work out, but clearly she works out. You don't know how it all happens. Guys, you got the neighbor that has the perfect lines in their yard, and then your yard's weeds and dirt, and you're getting HOA calls, right? It's interesting. Sometimes in our 30s, 40s, 50s, you realize like you're in a group, but then you realize you're not in the inner circle of the group. You realize like you're the third wheel of the group. And you wouldn't say it out loud maybe to anybody, but it still bothers you, doesn't it? Because there's something in us that needs approval. Let me say this. If you're a teenager, college student in the room, let me tell you something that might surprise you. Parents, you just go with me here. Did you know, if you're a teenager, if you're a college student, did you know that we as parents, we long for your approval? It's interesting. You don't think about it this way if you're a parent, but none of us, like this is, I think some of the times when we pull back on discipline or hard conversations or whatever it is, like that awkward conversation we need to have, we pull back because at the end of the day, we want the approval of our kids, our teenagers, our grown kids, whatever it is. Some of you need to have a conversation with a grown child. You don't want to do it. And the reason you don't want to do it is because you don't want them to hide from you. You don't want them to stiff arm you. You don't want them to, if they're a teenager, hide in their room on a phone for 3 days and not talk to you, right? Like, and there's something in us, and teenagers, you may be surprised by this, but we actually want this from you too. Isn't that a wild thing? Here's what happens. All these different places in our life. We want this from friends. We want this from neighbors. We want this from coworkers. We want this from our boss. We want this from the people that work for us. We want this from people that we don't even know who they are. And subconsciously, consciously, however it works, when we give this to someone, whether we know we're doing it or not, when we give them the ability to approve or not approve of us, what we do is we give a measure of power to them. Whoever it is, whatever it is, whatever dream it is, when you give this to someone, you give a measure of power. Think about this. Isn't it also true that if we think about our lives, I know this is true for me, we can all remember a time where our seeking of this led us to a place where we compromised. Led you to a place where you ended up somewhere that you shouldn't have been. You ended up doing something that you didn't want to do. You ended up going further than you had previously decided you would go in whatever the thing was in life. And you ended up just in a place that you didn't think you'd be. Because at the end of the day, none of us want to be the one that's not going with the crowd. Some of you ended up doing a business deal or doing something at work or cutting a corner, and it wasn't what you wanted to do, but you just didn't want to be the one that stood out. I think the truth is, and just think about this. I was thinking about this for my own life. I think the truth is that sometimes we would rather blend in than stand out. Like, isn't it true? Like, you want to be noticed, but you don't want to stand out. Like, you don't want to be the odd man out. And I think this is one of the interesting things, frankly, that's challenging about being a follower of Christ. Is particularly in the culture in which we live, is that by nature, almost everything in Christianity runs counter to our culture. So if you live out your faith, there's going to be a few times you don't get this from the world around you. And I was thinking about this as well. Maybe this is helpful for you. I think it's helpful for me just even to acknowledge it out loud. That sometimes I think our desire for approval can actually become a faith crisis. Like, because it's in us, right? We just want approval. And I think sometimes it leads us to a place of a faith crisis. Again, because sometimes we'd rather blend in than stand out. And here's the interesting thing. This is not new. This is at least 3,000 years old because Solomon talked about this very thing. Here's how he said it in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25. He said, the fear of man will prove to be a snare. The fear of man will prove to be a snare. Now, when he says man, he's not talking about man versus woman. He's talking about mankind. He's talking about humans. He says the fear of man will prove to be a snare. And we've talked about fear in the context of fear of God. Fear in this context means to tremble before. What he's saying is this idea that if we care about the opinions of other humans to the point that it shifts our behaviors, like you care so much that there was something you were going to do or not do, you care so much about what they think that it shifts your behaviors. If you do that, he says, the fear of man will prove to be a snare. Now, a snare is a trap. I'm not a rabbit hunter. I don't really know what all that entails, but I am a bit of an expert because I watched a couple of episodes of Alone, all right? There's another show, I think it's called Outlast, some of these wilderness shows that they set them out there and they give them just a few things to survive out in the wild. And inevitably, one of the things they have is a snare. Like, I don't know if I'd even know what that was if I hadn't seen the show, right? And here's what I know. Like, again, I'm not an expert. I didn't grow up hunting rabbits. But every time a rabbit ends up in that snare, it doesn't end well for the rabbit. They end up as rabbit stew, right? So, with that in mind, I decided to take Solomon's proverb. Eugene Peterson did this really well. I'm not very good at this. And I decided to give a modern day version of this proverb. So here's, based on that, my modern day version. You're probably going to want to memorize this as your new life verse. It says, our need for approval from other humans dooms us to become rabbit stew. That's what he's saying. Now, I put in there, this is Chris translation, and you always have to read the fine print. This version is not inspired, but you still might want to memorize it. Here's the thing that was happening. Solomon knew this firsthand. Like, in fact, I'll talk about this. I actually believe that when Solomon was writing this particular proverb, I think he was writing out of his own personal experience. He understood this firsthand. The need for, the power of, what it can do in your life when you're seeking after it. See, he was the king of Israel. Israel was designed to be God's people that would be the light and the hope to the rest of the world. And he was given the task of leading that group of people. No pressure not to screw that up, right? Your design, your whole people group that you're leading, light and hope to the rest of the world. And that was the pressure that he was under. Every single day of his life, he felt the pressure of approval. In fact, this mantle of wisdom, we talked about in the very first part of the series that the reason this book exists is because he had a measure of wisdom that was unlike any man ever before him, and God said, unlike any that would ever live after him. And this idea, this thing that he had of wisdom was a blessing, but it also became a curse because everybody wanted to know what he was thinking. All of his people expected him to give perfect wisdom all the time. There was an immense pressure that came to Solomon as a result of this gift that he had been given of wisdom. And not only his people, but the scriptures tell us that all kinds of other nations, the leaders of other nations, when they would be in these complex treaty or war scenarios, they would come to Solomon for advice, constantly looking for him. And with that as his story, every decision that he ever made was under scrutiny. He had eyes on him at every point of his life. And let me just say this, just from a personal space. As a person leading in a very public space, I felt that so many times. You just got all eyes on you. You're making the decisions. And this fear of man, this caring what people think to the point that it shifts your behaviors. Solomon says it will be a snare. And I think he was saying it will be a snare because it was his personal experience. It's interesting. Anytime you give someone the power of approval, whether it's a classmate, someone in your sorority, whether it's a group of executives, a certain group of moms, they get a measure of influence over your life. In fact, this is the way that I would say this. There's a direct relationship between approval and influence. When you seek someone's approval, you give them a measure of influence over your life. And so in the right hands, this can be a powerful tool. But in the wrong hands, it can be a disaster. And I don't have to convince most of us of that because we have our own personal stories, or we have a friend that we're watching live out this story currently, or we have a child that we're watching live out this story currently. It reminds me, when I was thinking about this, there's a quote from Craig Rochelle that I have used for years in my own life, and I've used with our team, that he says, if you rise on the applause of people, you'll fall when it's absent. If you rise on that need for approval, the minute that it's absent, you will fall. I'm so grateful for this. There's some of you in this church that are so encouraging. Others of you haven't developed that gift quite as far. But some of you are so encouraging, and even in this series, last week I was talking about money. It's like what no one wants to talk about in church or ever, and I had so many of you, so many parents, so many of you come to me and just say thank you for this. So many of you that have been encouraging. And the temptation for me is when that happens, it's like, it's one of these, right? But what happens when I walk through the hallways and it's silent? What happens when no one says anything? Is my worth, is my value based on this? What happens when the approval that's been there and that's been so audible is now silent? What happens to our soul? Or are we still okay? Like, as I'm saying this, I wonder who comes to your mind first. Like, who's the person? What is the group of people that you seek approval from? People at work? Is it a boss? Is it a parent? Is it a child? Some of us, according to Solomon, probably how he describes it, we're probably already there in the snare. In fact, for some of you, I don't have to convince you. You're like, I know I'm there. I've spent my life there. I'd just like for you, Chris, to jump to the end of the story where you give us, like, is there a solution? Is there an antidote? Is Solomon going to talk about that? And to that, I will say there is an antidote, and I think Solomon's wisdom will work. This is how he continues. This is how he talks about the second half of this proverb. First half, he says, the fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Like, whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe, like they're not in the snare. Like, they're not in danger. In other words, there's a direct connection between trusting in God and not being in a snare. Which, if I'm honest, and maybe you feel this way when I said it out loud, when I read that, that doesn't feel very practical. I'm like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Some of you are like, of course, the pastor tells us to trust in God, which I didn't even say it. Solomon said it. I just read it, but I get it. I felt the same way. Like, so what is Solomon saying? Like, are you saying I should memorize a Bible verse? What are you telling me to do? Like, when you're talking about trusting in the Lord, what are you talking about? So I want to break this down for a second. This word trust is key. Now, what I want to do is I want to go to another verse. There's another proverb that's actually a more well-known, probably many of you have memorized it along the way. You may have it on some picture in your house or some kind of scripting in your house. But this proverb uses the same word trust. And let me just give you a little, as I'm doing this, let me give you a little bit of a hack as it comes to how you think about studying in Scripture. Sometimes when you arrive to a word or a phrase or something you don't know, one of the things that you can do is find another place by the same author that uses that word, and you compare those two and start to put together what's actually being said. So this word trust is important. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, this is still Solomon. He says this. He says, trust in the Lord. It's our same word. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. I'm going to talk about that phrase in a second. And he will make your paths straight. Now, let me take you back. I want you to remember the two big ideas of Proverbs. One of them is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's this idea that God is God and I am not. God, you see what I don't see. You know what I don't know. You have a perspective on the things that I couldn't even begin to imagine. This is what he's saying. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. He's saying you've got to at some point, we at some point have to recognize God is God and I'm not. And I've got to stop leaning on my ability to source all of the information, figure this out myself, and recognize God is God and I'm not. He sees what I cannot see, and I may at some point have to, this is a word we don't like, surrender to what he sees that I can't see, what he knows that I can't know, what he feels and senses of the world that I can't know and sense and feel of the world. This is what he's saying. God is God and I am not. I've got to surrender my view to his view. I've got to surrender my timeline to his. Like, isn't it true that sometimes we just don't wait on God? It's like, yeah, I know God is in control, but I actually have to make the decision. But what if you don't? What if you don't? This is what he's saying. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Now, I want to talk about this little phrase, acknowledge him, or these two words, acknowledge him. This isn't like, I think when I was growing up, I heard this verse a lot. I grew up in church, going to church. Some of you did as well. And when I heard this, it was like, in all your ways, acknowledge him. And I thought, okay, so like every time I'm at an intersection in life, I got to stop and say a prayer. What college do I need to go to, God? Should I take the job? Should I date the girl? Should I, like at every intersection? And that is true. You should do that, but that's not what this verse is saying. It's different. That Hebrew phrase or those Hebrew words where he says, acknowledge him, literally means to know intimately. In other words, he's saying this, in all your ways, in everything you're doing in life, know him. Who? God. Know him with such an intimacy that your knowing of him intimately will guide your paths. Not that you're going to pray, he's going to give an answer, you're going to go. No, it's this, you know God so intimately. You spent so much time. You know the heart of the Father to the degree that when you come to that intersection, you're like, oh, I know what my Father would do. I know, I've seen it in Scripture. I've seen it in life. I've got it in the collective wisdom of others. In this moment, I know God so intimately that I know exactly what he will do. I've said this before, and some of you have heard this, but the way I think about this that makes it make sense in my life is I think about mine and Angie's relationship. We've been married for 25 years. If we could go to any cafe, any restaurant, anywhere in the city, and I could just step away, close my eyes, put my fingers in my ears, and my wife can order whatever it is that I needed to order, or I would have ordered. Now, some of this is because I admit I'm a creature of habit, right? Like if I've had something good at a restaurant, I just would get the same thing again. So that's part of it. But that's not all of it. We have just journeyed in life, guys. Like she knows what coffee I'm going to get. The only thing she has to ask, hot or cold. Like, are we doing hot or cold? I know what you're doing. Like everything else, we've journeyed together so long. And we've been in so many situations that we know how each other think. She can finish my sentences. Listen, let me tell you about this. I know that the minute we sit on the couch and I start a movie, my wife is going to get up and find something to do. Like she was sitting there for 10 minutes and she wants to watch the movie with me. It's like Pavlov. I don't know what happens. I hit the remote, I hit play, she gets up, she leaves. I'm like, then I have to hit pause. How do I know this? Because it's happened for 25 years. I know it's going to happen every time. This is what he's saying. He's saying, you gotta know me with such an intimacy that you just start to, in that moment, in that business opportunity, because sometimes you don't have the ability to get down on your knees by the cubicle and say, God, I need you to direct my path. Sometimes you got to be in the moment and know the heart and the character of your Father to know, knowing of him guides your paths. Knowing the response will guide the path. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Let me just tell you, this takes some work. This didn't happen in year 2. Year 2, I was still ordering all the wrong things. She was ordering all the wrong things. I was saying and doing all the wrong things. I still do that sometimes. But it takes time. There's something that happens in year 12, 15, 20. So for those of you that are new in your faith, I want to tell you to keep after it. Keep chasing after knowing the heart of God, getting to know who he is, how he sees you, how he sees the world. Now here's what I want to do. I want to take that idea of trust, and I want to retrofit it back to the verse that we started in. The fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. This idea of trust now, this idea of trust is surrender. You're God, and I'm not. That is the antidote to becoming immune to the need for this. Trusting in God, surrendering to God. God, you are God, and I'm not. I don't have all the answers. I think I do. I don't have all the answers. I can't see it. I can't see what's on the other side of that turn, that curve. I don't know what's happening 5 years from now. God, you are God and I'm not. I surrender. I surrender to you in this moment. And surrendering to God is what makes us immune to the need for approval. Have you ever been around people that they just seem unaffected? Like they're in the office, someone gossips or slanders about them. You tell them, they're like, Like, you have to defend your character. They're like, but I don't. You ever been around people that they're unaffected by the business ethics somewhere else? Like everybody's under pressure and they're worried, are you going to lose your job? Is the boss not going to favor you? And they just seem unaffected. They just do the right thing no matter what. And they seem to be carefree. I'm telling you, underneath it somewhere, it's this. Solomon says that trust in God, surrender to God is what gets you there. You don't have to worry about what everybody's thinking when you're concerned with what God is thinking and saying. It frees you up from the need for this from everybody else. So that begs the question for me. How do I get trust? Like how do I build trust? Like how do I trust God? For in that the question, like how do you trust a God you can't see? Like how does this work? And the answer is very simple, and it's so simple that you'll say, no, there's got to be something else. The way you build trust is relationship. You build trust with relationship. This is why I read the other proverb that says, in all your ways, know him intimately. The more you know him, the more you know his heart, the more you will trust him. In fact, I'm convinced that much of our generation that doesn't like God is because they don't know him. Because they've been introduced to a version of him somehow in culture that's not even the version of him that's real, that exists in the scriptures and exists in real life. When you get to know him, you will trust him. I'll give you this illustration. When I was a kid, I hated, my mom, I'm grateful for this. My mom, I didn't hate my mom. Let me just clarify that. Still don't. Mom, if you're watching, it was not a Freudian slip. It was, I love you, Mom. That's what I'm trying to say. When I was a kid, I hated swimming lessons. Because I had the physical properties of a rock when it came to swimming. They throw me in there, I'm just going straight down. It's hey, what's Chris doing? It's I don't know. I think he's on the bottom of the pool meditating, I just didn't like it. It was not fun for me. And I remember my mom wanted my life to exist, so she put me in swimming lessons. And I remember every day at school when I knew I had swimming lessons afterward, my stomach would start to hurt because I got so nervous, right? And I remember them telling me, I was in swimming lessons, and I remember the day they said, Chris, now to pass this class, apparently there was levels to this thing. I didn't know. You have to jump off the diving board into the big pool. Now, I'd heard rumors about the big pool. I didn't want any part of it. Big pool, 3 grown men could stand on each other's shoulders and still not reach the top. I didn't know why someone my height would ever want to be in that pool. I was young, but I was logical, right? And then I also understood my swimming skills. So no floaties. You get on the diving board, you jump in. And so they put me on the diving board, and they said, all right, Chris, jump. And I went, no, it's not going to happen. And so they said, no, you got to jump, or you're going to be a tadpole. That was a tadpole. So you're going to be a tadpole, and you can't go to the next level. This is the final test. You have to jump off. And I'm like, no. And here's my thing. I like tadpoles. I've seen tadpoles. They swim fine, and they don't ever have to jump off any diving boards. To me, I'm I'm fine with being a tadpole. But you have to jump in. I'm but I don't. And it went on for a while. And so the instructor's there, and I told her, I said, well, come closer. And I thought, my brain, I'm thinking, if I can kind of lily pad this thing, if I can hit her, then hit to the side. She came a little closer. But then I'm nah, I don't want to jump. And so I sat down on the diving board, and then here's where it went bad. She reached for my leg. She grabbed a hold of my leg to pull me in. And fight or flight kicked in. And I did the figure 4, figure 8. I did something on that diving board. Arms, legs, I am tucked in. I'm not going anywhere. And she's pulling on me. And I want you to know that day, I went home with scrapes on my belly, but satisfaction in my soul because I won. I stand here today proudly as a tadpole for life, right? That's it. Now, change one thing. Change one thing in this story, and it changes the whole story. Put my dad in the pool. Put my dad in the pool. I don't hesitate. I jump immediately. Why? I trust him. Why do I trust him? I have a relationship, and I've seen it. My dad has pulled me out of the waves. He's pulled me out of the rip current. True story. He's been there every moment where there was a tear in my eye. He's put Band-Aids on my knee. He's taken me to the hospital. He's taken me to the doctor. He's prayed with me. I know if my dad is in that water, I have a relationship with him. I have trust because of that relationship. And without hesitation, I jump in. Because here's what I know. If I slip, I go under. My dad will do whatever it takes to make sure that I don't live at the bottom of the pool. And your Heavenly Father's the same. The problem is some of you are seeing an instructor that you don't know in the pool. And I wouldn't trust him either. But if you ever give yourself the permission to get to know your Father, the relationship will grow and the trust will come. And then surrender in that just feels differently. The more intimately you know your Heavenly Father, the more you will trust him. Let me just say this. Some of you need to hear this. I need to hear this. Your Heavenly Father will move heaven and earth to get to you. He has. He did it through his Son on the cross. He loves you. And the more we get this, the less susceptible we will be to our need for human approval, which Solomon says is a snare. And it never, never ends well. So the real question is this. Whose opinion matters most? Like to you right now. I want us to read this verse out loud together. You ready? The fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. This is the difference between suave and suave. Live our lives chasing approval, end up becoming something we were never meant to be. I want to leave you 2 questions. The band's going to come, and I wanted to create some space just for us to kind of sit in this moment. So I've asked them to come. I want to give you these 2 questions. Whose approval is a snare to you, like right now? Like, you don't have to answer it to me, but I think for yourself, like you probably already know, what group of people, what person, whose approval is a snare to you? Like who's the group or the person that you're tempted to or you do on a regular basis change your behavior in order to whatever it is? Fit in, be like, be known. Second question is this. This is the real one. What's keeping you from trusting God? I don't know. What is it? For some of you, you've trusted him with your salvation, but it stopped there. Like you trusted him for eternity, but then you're like, oh, my marriage, my finances, this relationship, my retirement. What's keeping you from trusting him? Not with like a couple of things, but with all the things. I just want to encourage you, give him a chance. Get to know him. Don't take our culture's word for who God is. Don't take your bad church experiences word for who he is. Ask him. Let him tell you who he is and how he sees you. Talk to him. Read his love letter to you and let it just come off the pages telling you how he thinks about you. The heart of all of this is this word, surrender. Put it so big because we want it so small. I don't like it, man. I don't like it. I was taught, you don't back down. You don't surrender. Like, I don't want to surrender. This is it. You're God, and I'm not. You see what I don't. You have love in spaces where I have no love left. You are God, and I am not. And ironically, the only one whose approval ultimately matters, God, is the only one that you don't have to chase it from because he's already given it. Here's how it worked. Let me show you. It worked on the cross with his son Jesus, and God said, you are approved. That's it. You don't have to work for it. You just have to trust God for that, and it's applied to your life, and it's applied to my life. We just have to trust him. So I've asked the band to sing this song that talks about surrender. But I don't want them to sing it. I want to invite you to step into it. I heard this many years ago. I don't know if it's a pastor heard this illustration, but our palms are a signifier of surrender. Like you think about it back when it was Hitler and the Nazi regime, and when they would do their salute to Hitler, it was palms towards Hitler and the Nazi regime saying that that's who we surrender to. Have you ever seen the way the U.S. surrender or the way they salute this way, which is palms down saying we surrender to no one? And I heard this guy say the way of Christianity is palms up, saying, I surrender to God. God, you're God and I'm not. I've tried to run my life. It didn't go that well. I've tried to get the approval of people that let them put me in a snare. It's hands up. It's surrender to God. And I want to invite you in these moments. I don't know what you need. Maybe you feel like you fully surrendered. I don't know. I feel like Paul. Paul said, I die daily. Like I pick it up and I put it down. The thing I want to do, I don't do. The thing I don't want to do, I do. And so it's this daily thing. So I don't know, maybe you've got it on lock. Maybe you're better at this than me. Maybe you're better at it than Paul. But maybe you're like the rest of us, and you just need to surrender some stuff. For some of you, you need to surrender your heart to Jesus. And you say, I want to follow you in a relationship. The work of Jesus on the cross, I want to put my faith in that. So in this song, whatever you need, whether it's just in your mind, because you're like, I'm not using my palms in church. Whether you need to put them to the sky, whether you need to put them here, whatever you need to do, whatever the thing is, I wonder what it would look like if just a group of people just said, I surrender. I surrender. Father, in these moments, by your grace, do what you alone can do. God, as we do our best in our human frailty to surrender and say that we don't mean to do it, but we're just seeking approval in all sorts of ways, I pray that your massive approval of us would overwhelm us in this moment as we do our best to surrender. In Jesus' precious, powerful, resurrected, and majestic name, I pray. Amen. Let's stand as we worship.